social behavior of hermit crabs in general. Before proceeding with descriptions of the social behavior of the species studied, it would be helpful to consider the repertoire of behavior patterns of a hermit crab. The habit of inhabiting an empty gastropod shell markedly affects the behavior of hermit crabs. This is evident not only in certain special types of behavior, such as shell-fighting behavior, but even in modifications of their general locomotor behavior. Very few aspects of the behavior of pagurids are totally unaffected by the shell-carrying habit. The behavioral interactions which two individuals can undergo may be divided into those in which sex is or is not an important factor. In this study, two important categories of behaviors of the latter type were observed: general aggressive behavior and shell-fighting behavior. Although the sex of an individual may be of some importance in the general interactions of individuals and in shell-fighting behavior, it is not of major significance. Most species of hermit crabs are gregarious to some degree. Some species live in distinct groups and repeatedly come in contact with other individuals of the group. When two individuals come so close to one another that they can sense each other by some modality and thereby affect a possible change in behavior, social contact, one of three types of behavior takes place. The individuals may show no change in behavior and thus appear to ignore each other. Any externally unexpressed change in the organism's central nervous system, however important in later interactions, was by pragmatic necessity registered as nothing in the protocols of this study. If the sex of the organisms is appropriate and the individuals are in the appropriate physiological condition, sexual behavior may occur. The third possibility is aggressive behavior. As in any animal, the aggressive interactions between crabs rarely reach a level of actual physical damage. Moreover, in hermit crabs, the gastropod shell protects individuals from conspecific individuals as well as predators. However, intense aggressive interactions can result in the loss of one or more limbs. Also, if for any reason an individual comes out of its house, it will be attacked and eaten very quickly by its fellow crabs. In most cases, aggressive interactions are on a symbolic level. Interacting individuals affect one another's behavior by movements and postures whose modes of interaction are as signals or displays, governed by evolved rules of communication. These behavioral exchanges can lead to physical attack and damage, retreat by one or both individuals, or apparent indifference. In this study of aggressive behavior patterns, simple tactile and visual stimuli were the only types investigated. In the hermit crabs studied, the aggressive displays mainly involve positions and movements of the chelipeds or the ambulatory legs. In every species, the ambulatory legs, second and third periopods, may be moved rapidly away from the body in a characteristic fashion. This movement has been designated here as an ambulatory raise. See Figure 2. The angle to which the limb is raised, the speed of movement, and the relative positions of the limb segments vary from species to species, but the general pattern is the same in all species. The rigidity of the limb is variable, as it is moved from the normal, neutral position, walking, climbing, standing, etc., dorsally, through an arc of 30 to 75 degrees, until the limb is at right angles to the body. There may be a minor forward component in the motion, depending on the species. Once raised, the limb may be held in that position for some time or be rapidly lowered. Incomplete lowering and movement upward to the fully extended position may occur. In addition to the single ambulatory raise, hermit crabs may raise both first walking legs simultaneously, double ambulatory raise, or may raise both first and second legs in a similar manner to effect a quadruple raise. In the latter case, the crab supports itself with its chelipeds. In all species, the first walking legs are used much more frequently than the second, and only rarely are one or both of the latter moved without movement of the former. Figure 2a. Figure 2a. Single ambulatory raise. Paguridae cadenati. 2b. Major cheliped extension and single ambulatory raise. Calcinus tibicen. Scale lines 5 millimeters. In some species, there are two rather distinct movements of the ambulatory legs, the ambulatory raise mentioned above, and a second forward-directed movement, which I have called the ambulatory poke. In this behavior, the limb is moved away and up from the body. At the same time, it is moved forward, and this forward movement continues as the limb is brought down. This behavior pattern usually appears to be directed toward the eye stalk region of the other crab. The limb often physically strikes the other crab. Another group of movements that appear in aggressive interactions are those of the chelipeds. In some species, it is possible to recognize two distinct types of movement positions. I have called the first type of movement the cheliped presentation, figure 3. In this display, the crab lifts its whole body and shell slightly, spreads its legs a little, and moves its cheliped forward until the dactyl is approximately perpendicular to the substratum. This position is more distinct in the genus Pagurus, where the chelipeds are normally held back under the mouth area. In these species, there is a more pronounced movement of the chelipeds into the perpendicular presentation position. The chelipeds and body are usually held in this attitude for some time unless the crab proceeds directly into a cheliped extension. Figure 3. Major cheliped presentation, Pagurus pygmaeus. The cheliped extension is a movement that can act as a sign, stimulus, and also as a physically forceful movement. As will be shown later, it is a visually effective display, but it may also physically strike and move another crab. This movement has been described in Calcinus levimanus, Rees, 1962b. The chelipeds move rapidly forward and upward until the limb is approximately parallel to the substratum. Figure 2b and 4. When one crab backs into another, the chelipeds are frequently employed, pushing at the back of the shell. This is not always the stereotyped movement of an extension. Sometimes an extension is attempted, but cannot be completed because of the obstruction of the alien shell. Moreover, in aggressive interactions, two crabs may attempt extensions at the same time and result in pushing and hitting against each other's chelipeds. In both these instances, the chelipeds are not moved to the normal level for the species, due to the physical obstruction. In some pagurid species, it is not uncommon to see A smaller individual moved several centimeters when struck by the cheliped extension of a larger crab. Figure 4. Major cheliped extension, Paguridae marshi. Scale lines 5 millimeters. The movements described above were observed in all the species of hermit crabs studied. A possible exception is Diogenes, which may not have an aggressive display involving the ambulatory legs. These movements of the ambulatory legs and chelipeds are rather stereotyped, although the physical orientation of the crab can affect minor changes in the movements. The level to which the limb is raised may vary somewhat depending on the intensity of the aggressive situation. However, these behavior patterns appear to be sign stimuli sensu Tinbergen, 1951. Tests described below have shown that these postures are effective stimuli. When individual crabs come into social contact, i.e. come close enough to affect changes in one another's behavior, these displays may be followed by retreat, apparent indifference. One crab may move over another which has just executed an ambulatory raise, or further aggressive interaction. Multi-action sequences of various behavior patterns often occur. As two individuals of equal size approach, both may raise their whole bodies slightly. Animal A may give a single ambulatory raise, and Animal B perform a double cheliped presentation. A then executes a double ambulatory raise, B a major cheliped extension, etc., until A and or B retreat or crawl over the other. Interactions usually last only a few seconds, but long exchanges involving the execution of many aggressive displays may last some minutes. General aggressive interactions can also develop into shell fighting, and occasionally into sexual behavior. In addition to the general aggressive behavior outlined above, two other types of agonistic behavior patterns occur in hermit crabs. The first occurs as a distinct class of movements only in species in the family Paguridae. The Diogenid crab Petrocheirus diogenes may be an exception. Individual crabs often crawl onto the top of the shell of another crab. If the size relationship of the crabs is within certain limits, the crab crawled upon may move up and down and or side to side rapidly. This motion may cause the other crab to fall off. This dislodging shaking behavior pattern will be discussed more fully under Pagurus miamensis. Shell-fighting behavior was observed in all the hermit crabs studied. This behavior is peculiar to hermit crabs. As hermit crabs grow, they must periodically obtain a larger gastropod shell to inhabit. If no empty shell is found, the crab may attempt to get a more suitable shell that is already occupied by another hermit crab. Usually conspecific, although interspecific fights do occur. If the defending crab does not duck back into its shell at the approach of the attacking crab, an aggressive interaction may take place. After the defending crab has ducked in, the attacker turns the shell over several times, holding it with its ambulatory legs. It then places its chelipeds into the aperture of the shell. During this latter investigation and the subsequent behavior patterns, the crabs are in what I have called a posed position. If both crabs were in their normal position in the shell, they would have their eye stalk mouth areas and ventral cephalothorax surfaces opposite one another. However, one crab is usually withdrawn into its shell, thus obscuring whatever it may be doing. The other crab holds the shell with its ambulatories around the aperture of the shell. In this attitude, with apertures facing each other, the attacking crab is in a position to easily place its chelipeds in the hole of the other crab's shell. In all species, the aggressor next goes through positioning behavior. In general form, this consists of the attacker moving from side to side, over and slightly below the aperture of the defender's shell, while the defending crab's shell remains stationary. This movement of the whole body and shell, with the ambulatory legs held stationary, describes a horizontal figure eight in most species. The movements of the aggressive crab often cause some movement of the shell of the defending crab. The attacker then proceeds directly into wrapping behavior. Figure 5b. This is the most striking portion of this behavior pattern. In the Diogenid hermit crabs, the attacker holds its ambulatories and cephalothorax stationary, while through a movement of the abdomen, the aggressor's shell is rapidly brought forward into contact with the defender's shell. This physical striking can produce a click clearly audible to an observer. It was this clicking that initially attracted my attention to a pair of Clibonarius tricolor, which was engaged in a shell fight. The pattern is quite different in Paguridae crabs, although the movement of the interacting pair appears similar. The majority of the wrapping is effected by the attacker moving the defender's shell back and forth through motion of its own ambulatory legs. The attacker's body and shell usually remain stationary, while the defender is moved roughly parallel to the anterior-posterior axis of the attacker. These crabs also perform wrapping of the Diogenid type, but the effective behavior is the very short, rapid, spasmodic shaking characteristic of the Paguridae. Observations of crabs in clear plastic shells and of the exit of the losers in normal fights have strongly indicated that these movements are not simply the application of physical force by the attacker. Although the chelipeds of the attacker are often placed into the shell aperture, and the first or both pairs of ambulatories may also be placed down the aperture, little or no physical contact between the appendages of the two crabs takes place. After a varying number of wraps, the defender may come forward, move out of its shell completely, and climb onto the back of its own or the attacker's shell. Figure 5a. With its chelipeds and ambulatories, the attacker usually examines the now empty shell, and then very quickly shifts from its former shell to the recently vacated one. As the crab places its abdomen and cephalothorax into the new shell, the chelipeds and ambulatories are rapidly shifted to hold onto its former shell. The crab may hold the old shell for some seconds as it moves up and down within the new shell, and may eventually switch back to the old one. The winning crab always tries out the shell it has won, although it may abandon it after moving about within, while holding the old shell. However, it usually releases its hold on the old shell after several seconds. The defeated crab then quickly gets into the empty shell. If the loser does not stay close to the shells in question, and move into whichever one the winning crab leaves empty, it is almost always killed by conspecific individuals, if not by some other organism. Empty shells are rare, and a naked crab has little chance of finding one of habitable size before it is eaten. Figure 5a, shell fight. Calcinus tibicen. Loser nude on the back of shell of winning crab, scale line 5 millimeters. 5b. Shell fighting, wrapping in Clibinarius cubensis. Shell of attacker in raised position, scale line 10 millimeters. The other class of behavior observed was sexual behavior. However, the patterns associated with mating are best described according to species. Certain generalities are possible, and species similarities and differences are very interesting. Very briefly, just before a female crab is ready to mate, shortly before molting, she may come in contact with a male. In some species, the male carries the pre-molt female about for many hours before initiating specific precopulatory behavior. If the female possesses any matured larvae from a previous mating, she releases them and molts. The sequence is different in Pagurus bonaerensis and Paguristes cadenati. Prior to and usually continuing shortly after female molting, the male performs certain precopulatory behavior patterns. These vary widely, but the most common are rotating, shaking the female, Diogenidae, see figure 6, and jerking the female toward the male by short movements of the male cheliped, Paguridae, see figure 7. After some minutes or hours of the appropriate behavior patterns by the male, the female signals the male by movements of her chelipeds in his mouth region, see figure 8. The male then eases out until most of his cephalothorax is out of the shell, figure 9. The female also moves out of her shell, and the ventral surfaces are opposed as the male's fifth periopods move spermatophores from the genital openings at the base of his fifth periopods to the region of the female genital openings at the base of her third periopods. Both crabs then rapidly pull back into their shells, and a variable period of post-copulatory behavior by the male follows. In some species there may be more than one copulation by the pair. In others, the male performs post-copulatory behavior until the female has the new set of eggs in place on her pleopods. Figure 6. Pre-copulatory behavior, Calcinus tibicin, male rotating female. Figure 7. Pre-copulatory behavior, Pagurus bonaerensis, male on right, jerking female back and forth, scale lines 5 millimeters. Figure 8. Precopulatory behavior, Clibinarius antillensis, female tapping male below eye stalks just prior to easing out for copulation. Figure 9. Copulation, Pagurus miamensis, female obscured by male, scale lines 5 millimeters.